When will we see the first £500 million player? I believe the answer to this question is either around 2022, in 5 years' time, at the very latest, or never. And both are conceivable. Here's the two arguments, starting with 2022. We all know that transfers are likely to be vastly inflated by Neymar and Mbappe next summer and technically now, but this isn't a new thing. Clubs are breaking transfer records all over the place. They've got to, just to survive if they reach the Premier League or even the Championship. Huddersfield went 16 years without breaking their transfer record from 1997 to 2014. Look how many times they've broken it since. Brighton broke theirs 3 times, but we live in a world where Gabriel Jesus' £27 million transfer is regarded as a bargain, where players who've been relegated to the Championship are going for £30 million, and even players in League One are going for several million, such as Ademola Lookman. And if you look at the world outside football and look at transfer fees, it becomes even more bewitching. Here's one snapshot. I don't know what the inhabitants of Tuvalu, Nauru, Kiribati and the Marshall Islands thought of the signing of Neymar, but here's a list of those countries' GDPs in dollars for 2017. As the Neymar signing is the equivalent of more than $250 million, that means his transfer is worth more than these 4 nations. We literally now have footballers whose worth is higher than whole countries. Throw in his wages and you can add several others as well, such as Tonga. Is this right? Can one human being be worth that? And how's it happened? Well, if we look at the history of world transfer records over the years, we see that this is a game changer. Not only the size of the transfer, but the percentage leap upwards from the previous record. The increase from the £89 million of Paul Pogba up to the £198 million of Neymar is a rise of 121%. The previous biggest was back in 1982, when Maradona went from Boca Juniors to Barcelona for £3 million. A rise of just 71% from the record in 1976 of £1.75 million, when Paolo Rossi went from Juventus to Vicenza. As a comparison, Danielson signing in 98 for £21.5 million to Christian Vieri signing a year later for £32 million was a rise of nearly 50%. In 2009, Ronaldo's transfer for £80 million was a 42% rise from Kaká for £56 million 3 days before. The next landmark is probably the £250 million, and that could happen any time if somebody decided they wanted Ronaldo, Messi, maybe a few others. Let's assume there's probably only 5 to 6 teams from Europe that can both afford £250 million and would actually do it when the next window opens. For example, Bayern probably could afford it, but we know they won't. So the ones that probably could are PSG, Barca, both Manchester clubs, Chelsea and Real Madrid. Of course, Real and Barca both have substantial amounts to spend from the sales of Morata and Danilo and Neymar, so it could be them, especially if they want to reassert their might as the big spenders and repel these young upstarts from Paris. But if we assume that Mbappe only goes for about £150 million, is there a player out there worth £250 million that neither Barca or Madrid have already? The Manchester clubs seem to have their squad sorted out for the season. Conte at Chelsea moaned that he needed more reinforcements, having only spent £190 million this summer, and he'll probably sign some more over Christmas. And of course, despite all their outlay over the past 15 years or so, it's the one thing Chelsea have never done: signed the most expensive player in the world. But would Abramovich really spend £250 million? And more to the point, with his record of shedding managers, would he trust a manager to spend it? And again, who's worth it? That leaves PSG, and one suspects at this moment that they won't be signing anyone in the near future. What about the rest of the world, if not Europe? It used to be the case that a big money transfer sold shirts in their local town, and maybe a few other cities. Now, the mega clubs have to look at how a signing translates around the world, and in particular, Asia. The Chinese league has seen transfers of 70 million plus for Tevez, 60 million for Oscar, 46 million for Hulk, and 36 million for Alex Teixeira. These players are trebling or quadrupling their wages, Tevez apparently on £615,000 a week. Even Chinese players themselves are moving for inflated fees. Did anyone notice the transfer of Zhang Chengdong from Beijing Guoan to Hebei China Fortune in January for £17.4 million? Surely the £250 million mark will be breached in the next 5 to 10 years or so if that league continues to flourish. The problem is, of course, that no one really cares outside China about these games or leagues. Remember last summer when Sky announced that it was going to start showing the Chinese Super League? Barely caused a ripple. Do you know anyone who watches it? Does anyone care? Is anyone going to buy a Guangzhou Evergrande shirt outside China? The only reference I saw to the league in the last few months was that weird fight with Oscar that did the rounds on social media. In any event, Sky's viewing figures are starting to fall, and I don't think showings of the Chinese league are going to change this. There are also moves to cap spending in that league, and there's already a limit on the number of players from overseas each club can sign, 4 foreign and 1 from another Asian Football Confederation country. Therefore, in the short term, presumably the Chinese league can only get to a certain level and will plateau off. The only thing that might push it on again is the awarding of the World Cup in 2026 or 2030. But that's quite a long time to wait, and in the meantime, for the league to grow, they surely either need a strong showing at the next World Cup, or for a true superstar to arrive in his prime, like a Neymar. There's also an argument to say that the entire transfer system needs ripping up because it doesn't respect the laws of free movement as defined by the European Court of Justice. Players are moved on without their consent or refuse the chance to move on from their parent club. The Financial Times wrote about research by FIFPro that has identified other forms of abuse in the transfer system. Players who ask to leave their club against owners' wishes are bullied, harassed, and at times even physically abused. No one would tolerate this state of affairs in any other business, with the possible exception of organised prostitution, but naive young professional players can be easily exploited. So it's probable and possible that the £250 million will be reached next summer, or the summer after, because let's be honest, in the current climate, one good season could now be enough for a player who is young and promising enough. Asensio, anyone? Then it's very possible also that we'll trundle along a bit, maybe reach 275 to 300 million pounds, and then suddenly a rich owner will just push go and we'll have our first £500 million player within 5 years, possibly after a massive leap from 375 million straight up to £500 million. However, at some point, several of these things could or must surely happen, and any one of them could derail a £500 million transfer. The transfer system will be challenged, as I mentioned earlier, and completely overhauled. It's unlikely in the near future. A big club will completely fall apart. We've seen it happen with Parma and to a lesser extent Leeds, either because it overstretches or because its owners decide to sell up, perhaps both. Other owners take note and the transfer market pulls back. Fans will get cheesed off with Sky and start cutting down on the amount they pay, and that will lead to a cut in the share that clubs get. Similar patterns will happen across Europe. Overseas players will get bored with their China experiment and leave in droves, and investors will realise that there's just so many of them that they're not actually richer than any other club, so they'll start selling up at a loss. If some or all of these happen, then it should all start to simmer down. But we've been saying that the market has to slow down for years, haven't we? So if we're wondering which comes first, the changes that the game probably desperately needs, or the first £500 million player, I think it's the latter.